Today from the global lane. Where in the world? North Korea and China. It's back to the bargaining table for Rocket Man Un. Talks with South Korea were about more than just the Winter Olympics. And what about Beijing and its role? We'll talk to author Stephen Mosher, who says China is the bully of Asia. On the home front, a bipartisan kumbaya on immigration reform at the White House. Is amnesty without a border wall on the horizon? We'll look at war in 140 characters, how social media is threatening our security. Our man on the street, Mung Fei Lee, asks people what they think about Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. Is social media bettering our lives? And I'll drive it home on Hollywood's latest obsession, Oprah for president. What does she really believe? And it's all right here, right now from the global lane. President Trump's tough talk on North Korea has apparently paid off. A North Korean delegation met for talks with South Koreans at the DMZ in a building right on the North-South Korean border called Freedom House. They discussed North Korean participation in the upcoming Winter Olympics, and they also discussed talks about easing military tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Well, joining us now with more is Stephen Mosher. He's author of a new book on China called Bully of Asia. Stephen, thank you for joining us. Why did North Korea agree to have a dialogue with South Korea at the DMZ?
Well, this is part of a long pattern, Gary, of what the Chinese call da tan tan, which means talk, fight, fight. And as the pressure increases on North Korea is trying to buy a little time by entering into negotiations with South Korea. The leader of South Korea, of course, runs a country with 45 million people. About 12 million of those people live within 15, 20 miles of the border with North Korea. So they're very vulnerable to a North Korean attack. And I think that President Moon is happy to ratchet down tensions, and Kim Jong-un is probably using him for that purpose. This is really not about the Winter Olympics. It is about buying Kim Jong-un more time to assemble more rockets and assemble more nuclear weapons, and perhaps ease off on the sanctions a little bit.
Well, how likely is it, Stephen, that the initial talks will lead to more in-depth talks?
Well, there have been talks at Panmunjom on the border there at the demilitarized zone for years. I've been there as well. We're talking about the most heavily armed border in the world, with hundreds of thousands of troops on both sides of the border staring down the barrels of their rifles and artillery pieces at each other. North Korea still believes that the South Korean regime is illegitimate, and it wants to conquer the South. And then, of course, north of North Korea, you've got China sitting across the border, secretly giving petroleum and other products to North Korea to keep its industrial machine afloat and to keep the North Korean people fed.
Well, what does Kim really want to see happen in the long term?
Well, over the long term, he wants to be a nuclear-armed power with missiles pointed at the United States, in a position to extort more money from Japan, South Korea, and us in order to fund his regime, which is pretty good at assembling rockets from components made in China, but not very good at feeding its own people or improving their standard of living or even maintaining their good health. This is a game that North Korea has been playing now for 30 years. His father, Kim Jong-il, for years was able to extort money from the Clinton administration in the late 90s on the promise of doing what? On the promise of giving up his nuclear weapons program, on the promise of giving up his missile program. He kept building, he kept assembling, took billions of dollars. Finally, that program was cut off. Again, the same game was played in 2008, 2007 with the Bush administration. He collected several hundred millions of dollars then. So Kim Jong-un, Little Rocket Man, is simply following in the footsteps of his father, whom we might call Big Rocket Man, and assembling weapons, pointing them at the United States, Japan, and South Korea, and saying, pay me money or I'll shoot off a weapon. It's worked before. He has no reason to think it won't work again.
So this is really deja vu. We've been down this road before, and China is the key, is it not? I think that's what President Trump said. So what's the meaning of the title of your book, Bully of Asia? Are you suggesting that China will dominate Asia, including North Korea?
Well, if we look back at history, China was the dominant power in Asia, East Asia, for over 2,000 years. In fact, until 1820, China had the largest economy, the largest population, the largest military in the world. It wants to recover its lost place at the center of things. That's what the name of the country means, of course. Zhongguo, as a lot of people know, means Middle Kingdom, the kingdom at the center of the earth, the kingdom that, in their view, should govern all under heaven. That's another Chinese phrase, all under heaven. The reach of the Chinese imperial state is theoretically infinite. It expands now to incorporate the whole globe. And they would like to see China replace the United States as the dominant power in the world. Now, if China were a free market democracy, if the Chinese people were free to worship God in the way they chose, they had freedom of conscience and freedom of assembly and regular elections and so forth, as the Chinese do on Taiwan, by the way, this wouldn't be a problem. We would collaborate together, we would cooperate, we would have a peaceful democratic world order. Unfortunately, China is moving in the other direction. China is a one-party dictatorship. The new Red Emperor, Xi Jinping, controls not just the Communist Party, but the military as well, and the government. He is both president, generalissimo, and party general secretary. Just a few days ago, he held military exercises throughout China in which he dressed up in a military uniform, Gary, and had his visage broadcast to 1 million Chinese troops scattered throughout the length and breadth of China. We haven't seen the leader of a major state dress up in a military uniform and parade around the stage like this since, I think, Mussolini. Even Putin, you know, who rides around sometimes on horseback with his shirt off, doesn't dress up in a Russian general's uniform and exhort the troops to be brave and aggressive.
Didn't he also say prepare for war?
Absolutely. And they've been preparing for war since, well, really since the founding of the People's Republic of China back in 1949.
The French don't feel they're at war. President Emmanuel Macron made his first visit to China. So what is he after, and what does Xi want in return?
Well, what Xi wants through his new Silk Road initiative is to unite the Chinese economy, not just with Central Asia and South Asia, but he wants to drive roads and railroads all the way across Asia, Eurasia, to Europe. You know, there's a weekly train now that leaves from China and arrives in London a week later. So he's trying to draw in all of Eurasia, the largest continent in the world, into the Chinese economic sphere. He wants to reassemble the world economic order and refocus it on China. So that's what he's all about. It is not in our interest, of course, to let the People's Republic of China dominate Eurasia, much less dominate larger parts of the world.
He would prefer to see a united Europe, a strong European Union, I'm sure. So how should America prepare then for the growing Chinese influence around the world and the country's rise as an economic and military powerhouse?
Well, we still have a few cards to play. One of those cards, of course, is called Taiwan, where for the first time in 5,000 years of Chinese history, we have Chinese people who have a free market democracy. They've been a democratic government since the mid-90s. If we simply join together with our allies that share our values and institutions and present a kind of united front against Chinese aggression, I think we can contain it. And that's, I think, what our policy ought to be in the Indo-Asian theater.
Well, it seems like our president is moving in that direction. So, Stephen Mosher, author of Bully of Asia, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
At the White House, President Trump held a rare televised bipartisan meeting on immigration reform. Republican and Democrat leaders from the House and Senate gathered to begin hammering out legislation to meet a deadline imposed by the president. It affects about 800,000 children of illegal immigrants. Many of them are now adults. Here's what the president had to say.
I feel having the Democrats in with us is absolutely vital, because this should be a bipartisan bill. This should be a bill of love. Truly, it should be a bill of love, and we can do that. But it also has to be a bill where we're able to secure our border. Drugs are pouring into our country at a record pace.
Joining us now with more is the founder and director of NumbersUSA, Roy Beck. Mr. Beck, what was your reaction when you heard the president say that immigration legislation should be a bill of love? Is he going soft on immigration?
Well, sometimes you do things for PR purposes, so I can kind of forgive him for using a phrase that the former governor, Florida Governor Jeb Bush used. You know, he wants to do right and be helpful, give mercy to these young adult so-called DACA recipients who are here illegally. But you know, what we want to hear more than anything is that he wants to show love to the vulnerable Americans that are struggling, even in this economy. So many Americans don't have jobs, aren't in the workforce at all, are struggling with very low wages. That has to be his top priority. And he says it's his top priority. The things that the White House put out say that his #1 priority in immigration policy has to be struggling American workers.
And it seems the president's willing to work a deal right away on DACA before negotiating a more comprehensive immigration reform bill. Is he wasting away the leverage he has with the Democrats?
We really don't know. I mean, he said some things this week that sounded like he was just basically going to cave and give up the leverage altogether. For example, if he were to give an amnesty to the 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 DACA recipients and get in return only border security, for example, well, he would have lost his leverage, because the leverage for there to be enough Democrats to pass a bill in the Senate is they want to get the work permits. They want to get the lifetime work permits and residency for these young adult illegal aliens.
He did say that a DACA deal must include border security, yet he did say he'll sign whatever Congress sends him. So does that mean we're heading towards amnesty for illegals, at least for the dreamers without better border security?
Well, you know, one thing I think the American people have to adjust to is that the president is dead set on giving an amnesty. This would be the 8th amnesty, by the way. We've had 7 already, starting in 1986.
And even Ronald Reagan, right?
Yeah, the first one was under Ronald Reagan, and then there were 6 more in the 90s. I mean, not only does the amnesty reward illegal immigration, but the question is, do you set up the country for the next amnesty? In previous 7 amnesties, those amnesties did not require a verification system, you know, a reliable verification system that would cut off the jobs magnet. The main reason that we have 11 million or more illegal aliens in this country is because they can get jobs. We cannot have yet another amnesty that just sets up for the next amnesty. Let's stop illegal immigration once and for all. So maybe, you know, my organization has endorsed a House bill that actually does include a DACA amnesty. This is the first time we've ever done that. We've fought every amnesty since 1996.
Is that Bob Goodlatte's bill?
Bob Goodlatte from Virginia. It's a compromise. It gives amnesty to these 700,000 DACA recipients, but it immediately, or within 2 years, requires all employers to use E-Verify, cuts off the jobs magnet so we won't have to deal with another amnesty later on, and it ends chain migration. It says that you're no longer going to be able to just keep bringing extended family.
And President Trump, even before he was president, when he was campaigning, the wall, the wall, the wall, we need the wall. So I want you to listen to what he said about the wall.
Is there any agreement without the wall? No, there wouldn't be. You need it. John, you need the wall. I mean, changing your tune. Wonderful. I'd love not to build the wall, but you need the wall. And I will tell you this, the ICE officers and the Border Patrol agents, I had them just recently up, they say if you don't have the wall, you know, in certain areas, obviously, that aren't protected by nature, if you don't have the wall, you cannot have security. You just can't have it. It doesn't work.
So, Mr. Beck, will the border wall be negotiated away, or will it happen?
I feel fairly confident that there will be some additional wall and fencing, and I got to say that the wall is not the most important thing, because even if you've got a wall across all 2,000 miles, and it's very, very successful, the majority of illegal aliens today come to the country legally. They come here on visitor visas. They come here as tourists, as students, as temporary workers, and then they overstay their visas.
I think you've been fighting these battles for at least 20 years, have you not? So,
21 years.
Yeah. So now after that White House bipartisan meeting, are we going down the same road as before, amnesty and no real reform here?
Because this should be a bipartisan bill.
We are on a road that's headed that way. There's a fork in that road, and one of the forks leads down there, and the other fork leads to something that's really new, and that we were promised by candidate Trump and President Trump would be the way he would go. We've got to do everything we can to keep the pressure on the president and particularly on the Republican leaders in Congress to not sell us out again.
Okay, he always keeps us guessing, doesn't he? Roy Beck of Numbers USA, thank you so much for your insights. 2018 promises to be a big year for high tech. More and more people are relying on companies like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and our president's favorite, Twitter, for communication. The latest technological gadgets and social media platforms are surely making our lives and communication easier, but these tools and platforms may also endanger our lives and our security and make war more possible. Well, joining us now via Skype is David Arcos. He's author of a new book called War in 140 Characters: How Social Media is Reshaping Conflict in the 21st Century. Please help us, David, to understand the title of your book. What do you mean by War in 140 Characters?
Obviously, because 140 characters was the original Twitter limit. I look obviously not just at Twitter in my book, but at Facebook, but at and Instagram and YouTube and all the big social media platforms and how they're being used in warfare now, and how the nature of warfare is changing as a result of the nature of new information technology, and how this is really, affecting quite substantially warfare in the 21st century. The classic template of war: two or more sides would have a fight in a geographical area as delineated as a boxing ring, and the winner would then impose a political settlement on the loser. The classic example being the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. Now, what you're seeing is a move away from this type of conflict. A classic example of this is Russia and Ukraine. Putin, sent soldiers into tanks into eastern Ukraine to destabilize the country, but he never had any intention of defeating Ukraine, which in the early days, at least, he could have done easily. Rather, what his goal was to destabilize Ukraine. And the way he wants to do this was by getting Eastern Ukrainians to subscribe to a particular narrative. When you're trying to get people to subscribe to a particular narrative, this is a political, not a military goal. It's like when I spoke to UK, British and American soldiers who had fought in Afghanistan, and they said that the goal in the end became not to militarily defeat the Taliban, but to get the local population to convince the local population not to join the Taliban. And this is a political, non-military goal. And the same thing you saw in Ukraine. And as a result, social media is vital because, political goals are based on, narratives, convincing people.
Well, we've seen that. Have we not seen that right here in the United States with Russian influence over the election? They really had a lot of social media propaganda, should I say, on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth, leading up to our election.
Absolutely. I mean, that's in a non-war context, but it's the same principle.
President Trump has been criticized for his tweets. I'm sure he sees them as his best means of communicating unfiltered by the mainstream media. So what's the upside and downside of this new era of presidential tweets?
I mean, this is the thing. Donald Trump is the first social media president. You could not have Donald Trump without Twitter. A single tweet of his can dominate a news cycle for 24 hours. And the thing about social media platforms is that they're perfect for people like Donald Trump because they reward the sensationalist, the strident, and they are geared away from nuance and depth of argument.
So are we now living in an era of superficiality rather than substance?
Well, I mean, to a degree we always were, but this has accelerated it, sure, absolutely.
And what do we do about it?
Look, I mean, I think eventually some change will have to come to the legislative level. I mean, as I say, I have a problem with the term fake news, but at least making people aware of it, how to spot it, how to, what to look for, to understand that just because something is popular doesn't mean it's necessarily good. In fact, obviously, often the inverse is true, that what is sensationalist goes viral. And I think we need to go right into schools, teach social media literacy, and at some point, legislative action is going to have to be taken because social media companies policing themselves is not working.
Okay, David Arcos, the author of War in 140 Characters. I'm sure it can be purchased wherever books are sold. God bless you. Thanks for being with us. What do you think about social media? Is it a useful tool for communicating with friends, family, work associates, or an unwelcome evil tearing down the fabric of in-person communication in our society? You remember the telephone and talking face-to-face? Whatever happened to that? Well, we decided to send our man, Mung-Fei Lee, out on the streets to hear what people are saying about it.
Here's a question. Do you think social media platforms are dangerous today?
I mean, not really, no.
So you don't believe that, say, we can start a war just based on using social media?
Sure, I think the conversations we have can start a war, but I think those conversations can happen in person. I think social media is powerful and it can be used in a lot of different ways, and I think we just have to be careful about how we use it.
I wouldn't say they're so dangerous, but I do think that they kind of cause problems.
I would say that's a possibility because you could read it to anything wrong. So, yeah, it depends on the receiver, how they receive the message. So,
let's just say someone believes social media platforms today are very dangerous. Now, what are your thoughts on that?
They can be dangerous depending on what you put on the social media.
No, do you think it's so dangerous that we can even start a war just based on social media conversations, exchange, or messages?
I don't think so. I think people have common sense and hopefully use that common sense to screen out what they put on that social media.
I hate social media. I hate it all. I've never had an Instagram. I deactivated my Facebook. I don't do Twitter.
Since you deleted all your social media accounts, now do you believe that someone says social media platforms are dangerous today?
No, not necessarily. I think there's some benefits to them. You just have to be a responsible social media user.
Well, the last question is, if you deactivate all your social media platforms, and how do you follow our president about his thoughts and his strategies and all those important news? How do you do that?
Yeah, because he likes Twitter, right? Like that's his platform. I'm a big fan of like CNN.com, and I watch the news and I let people tell me what's going on. But yeah, I will not be creating a Twitter account for you, Mr. President.
I just can't help but weigh in on the latest frenzy hovering over Hollywood. Oprah for president. Oprah, that's right. It came after a rousing round of applause, cheers, and adulation for the media marvel during the Golden Globes broadcast. She was presented with a Cecil B. DeMille Lifetime Achievement Award, and then she gave a speech about sexual harassment and abuse in Hollywood.
So I want all the girls watching here and now to know that a new day is on the horizon.
Yes, it was a very good speech. Bravo, Oprah, for speaking out. But where were you several years ago? Certainly you must have known about the abuse that women received from your friend Harvey Weinstein, like Meryl Streep and many others. Why did Oprah turn a blind eye to unacceptable, if not criminal, behavior? And remember that sexual abuse scandal involving the matron of her leadership academy in South Africa? Well, Oprah did do the right thing when she found out about it, but she made a poor choice of personnel, a woman who allegedly abused the girls. So I guess that means if she does run for president and gets elected, we can't expect her to thoroughly vet immigrants now, can we? And strangely, despite all her wonderful philanthropic work around the world, I don't recall Oprah ever speaking out forcefully about the abuse of women in Muslim countries. Yes, if Oprah decides to run for president, these are just some of the issues that will come up. I can't help but admire her achievements. I even liked her performances in The Color Purple and The Butler. But President Oprah, not for me. She's successful in Hollywood and media, but lacks experience and understanding of politics. And I know what you're thinking. What political experience did Donald Trump have before becoming president? And that's a fair question. But he was a successful real estate developer and business negotiator, a master deal maker. That's who many Americans wanted to renegotiate NAFTA, trade deals, and the Iranian nuclear agreement. And now, with a year of the presidency under his belt, Donald Trump has become a politician. Just listen to how the president responded to the possibility of Oprah running against him in 2020.
Yeah, I'll beat Oprah. Oprah would be a lot of fun. I don't think she's going to run. I know her very well.
So Trump doesn't think she'll run. After all, why would she want to leave her billionaire lifestyle and investments to enter politics? Yes, Trump did it, but outsider Trump was really the exception, not the rule. The star of The Apprentice has been an apprentice in the White House, and he's still learning the job of being president. I don't believe the country really wants to elect another inexperienced outsider next time. And if she runs, she'll need some of those blue-collar voters that Trump won in 2016. But with the economy already taking off, businesses coming back, it's doubtful Oprah could manage to pull enough of those voters because they'll remember who brought those jobs back. She'd also need some evangelical voters to win. That's unlikely because many doubt her spiritual faith. This is how Oprah responded more than 7 years ago to the belief that Jesus is the only way to heaven.
There couldn't possibly be just one way. What about Jesus? What about Jesus?
And you say there isn't only one way. There is one way and only one way, and that is through Jesus.
There couldn't possibly be with
because
millions of people in the world. There couldn't possibly be.
And about 1 year after that, Oprah said she was a Christian.
My favorite Bible verse, because I am Christian, is Acts something. I used to know the number, but it's in Acts. Y'all can Google it. But it says, thank you, 17:28. In God I live and move and have my being.
But Oprah, if you are truly a Christian, and I'm not here to judge your faith or your relationship with Christ, but I need to remind you of what Jesus said in John 14:6. He said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. So that means there's no other way to heaven. Jesus said that long before any pastor, priest, or Christian did. And you either believe him or you don't. Now, if you don't, then please don't call yourself a follower of Christ. If Oprah runs, she'll need to clarify her position on that and many other issues of our day. But let's not be obsessed about who our next president may be, whether it's Oprah, Donald Trump, or anyone else. In Romans 13:1, we're told, there's no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Now, that doesn't mean we're off the hook. God still expects us to be his hands and feet and vote. He wants us to choose godly leaders. We sure could use more of those right now, couldn't we? Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.